Hi, everyone, and welcome to Resource Revolution, the resource management podcast. I'm your host, Christine Robinson, and on this podcast, we will discuss the real-life experiences of people in and around the world of resource management. Today, we have Georgia Cockram joining us. Georgia is a resource advisor for MHA, a chartered accountants, tax and business advisory firm. MHA are also the UK independent member firm of Baker Tilly International. Georgia has been in resource management for almost 2 years now, all of which have been spent at MHA. She started her career as a coordinator before stepping up into the advisor role. Outside of work, she enjoys netball, being on holiday either in the sun or on the ski slopes, and socializing with friends and family. Georgia, it is so great to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I am excited about this conversation, Georgia, because I think you have a great experience and perspective that many of our listeners would relate to. As I'm sure you know with your own personal experience, it's interesting in resource management. Sometimes there aren't a lot of people that are kind of in your same boat and people that have experienced the same things as you. So it's interesting. I love to understand how people got started within resource management in the first place. Can you tell us about that? How did you find resource management?
So I fell into resource management by chance, which I think could be the case for a lot of people as well. It's not one of those roles that you kind of see everywhere. Now a lot more, but not so much when I first joined. I was just looking for more of an admin role around like EA, PA kind of thing. And I just was talking to a recruiter and they just said, I think your personality is going to really match this role. It's not quite what you was looking for, but everything is transferable and really think you should go for it. So I never had RM background. I've been in the civil service. I actually started on the other side. So I worked for BDO for a few months as an audit trainee when I first left school. And then in COVID, like during 2020, I moved on and then went into the civil service doing parliamentary legislation, which is just completely different to obviously RM. And you wouldn't think that there's much crossover, but in terms of, I suppose, what I know I am capable of and what was obviously then demonstrated, I ended up falling into the resource coordinator role at MHA. So yeah, rest is history, I guess.
Amazing. I love that story. So it's so interesting to hear the very different backgrounds sometimes from a professional perspective that people will bring into the role. So that's really, really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Given all of that, and not only your experience in somewhat different areas, but then coming into this role, what attracted you to it? And is it the same thing that makes you stay? What do you enjoy about it?
I think what kind of enticed me in the beginning was that it was a new function to the firm and it kind of meant that there was room for growth and room for error. No one had really done it before, so I could make it my own. And I think that's the case for a lot of resource kind of professionals, I guess. Lots of firms are really trying to implement it now. And although everyone has the same end goal, you really can make it your own. And that is one of the things that I really wanted to do. And you just get so much exposure to seniors in the business and partners, and there's a lot of responsibility that obviously comes with that in professional services and industries like accountancy and audit. It's a very kind of fee earner, so to say, kind of dominant industry, and they're always in the face of everything. They're the ones that are bringing in the clients. They're the ones bringing in the money and everything. You don't really see the operations going on in the background. But being in RM, you actually are fundamental to that working. So that is something that I've really come to enjoy in the role for sure. So I think in my first week, I was in a room with partners, including like the COO, directors, managers, and I was I think 21 when I first joined MHA, and I was so overwhelmed, and I was like, why are these people asking me what I think about this situation and what we should do here? And I think from then on, I was just very open to the role. the responsibility it's bringing and what I could make it and how I could kind of benefit the firm and what I could do for the firm in the future.
That is amazing. And I think in a lot of ways, what many resource managers or resource management professionals are striving for is getting to that point of having that relationship to be able to share perspectives and share insights to leadership around where they can either focus, where there might be an issue or a challenge, and how they can really be collaborative in an advisory, really a business advisory type of role. So that's fantastic that you had that experience in general, but especially so early on. I imagine that was probably very motivating at that time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it obviously depends on the firm, but it really empowers you as an individual. For people that have been at the firm for years and years and years, and they're still looking for kind of different answers and different solutions. And that's the kind of firm that you want to be a part of. And I think as well, it gets very personal for people that are fee earners. They're the ones that are winning the clients. It means a lot to them, whereas to us, we're very neutral, like as from the RM perspective. And I think they understand that we have kind of a much bigger oversight rather than, especially in partnerships, like we've got like 40 partners, and each to them, everything's just their clients are the ones that are important. And they obviously are, but what makes something more important than the other? And I think that's when our input is really, really, really vital.
Couldn't agree more. And you touched upon something, Georgia, that I think is important to highlight. It's this idea of there's the job, right? There's what resource management is trying to achieve, and we're filling needs, and we're dealing with all kinds of staffing scenarios. And the other part of it is that you're dealing with not only people, but you're dealing with, in many cases, very senior people that have a lot of pressure on themselves and on their teams. They've got expectations that, of course, they're trying to meet. The thing that you said that really struck a chord with me was this idea of it seems like you're incorporating that relationship aspect as part of your resource management, let's say, philosophy or operations. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? So how do you maintain good relationships with these people that are coming to you and needing things, and I would imagine, making demands in certain cases, but also keeping in mind that bigger picture? Because I imagine that it's probably not simple, right? I know in my own experience and in speaking with others in this industry, rarely is there a situation where a leader will come to you and need something from resource management and it falls out of the sky perfectly, exactly as they've imagined, right? There's usually conflict or some sort of messaging that needs to go along with that. What's your perspective there?
Yeah, and it can be really difficult. There are partners that are going to have clients that have been there for years and years and years, and there's going to be, when the firm is growing, you're going to be aiming for newer clients, bigger clients, and it does get really, really difficult, because at the end of the day, if they didn't win clients, we wouldn't get paid. So it's a real kind of a balancing act. But I think communication is something that I've always said is the most important thing. At the end of the day, they are professionals, and they are going to understand that some things can't happen exactly how they want them to. And it's about thinking of solutions rather than just kind of saying no. There's going to be an alternative somehow, whether or not it's the solution that they want immediately. But it may just be that it's something that they've not thought of, or they just need to look at it from a different perspective. And it usually comes down to they want certain people on the job, they want certain people working on that client because they work with them all the time. But I think then from our point of view, it's resource management and kind of filling those roles and filling those jobs. It's not just about getting work out the door. It's about the investment in the people as well. So the relationship with like the partners and that communication comes from having a relationship with everyone else as well. You kind of have to have both, even though the seniors are obviously always going to be really important. you have to think about, it's not just about continuity. There are always going to be higher achievers in the firm than others, but it's about getting exposure and giving everyone else the opportunity to get to that point, and then you can offer those people as a solution. If you've done everything in the background, the development, the training, then you will be able to communicate that message back to the seniors and back to the partners. And it is often a difficult conversation, and you will have a lot of back and forth, and you might feel like you've hit a bit of a checkmate sometimes, but that's why you have escalation points. And in our firm, we have like a resource management group, and we have a resource management partner. So he's an audit partner, but also an RM partner. So it's about doing what you can. And if it needs escalation, it needs escalation, but you have to kind of communicate everything and keep everyone involved. And I would say that's probably one of the main things.
Absolutely. So a couple of real gems in there in what you just shared that I'd like to highlight. One of the things that really resonated with me, Georgia, that you said is, and I quote, "There is going to be a solution." This is something that I think every resource manager, resource management leader needs to hear. And realistically, they've probably coined their own phrase around that, because it's one of the things I know in my experience when I was very, very new to resource management, and I was myself in charge of staffing, right, a certain population of people. And inevitably, you get yourself into that situation where there doesn't appear to be a solution. And I think what many of us also are familiar with is this very high pressure situation, as you started to describe. A lot of people in this space are under pressure. They're trying to deliver on promises that they've made their clients. They are trying to deliver on what the team experience is supposed to be. And at times, those puzzle pieces just don't fit together. And I heard something that was told to me by one of the more senior resource managers at the time. And it stuck with me, and it stuck with me forever. And I've said it myself now. And it's this idea of it always works out. It always works out. And it's so amazing to me, because I remember she said that to me, and I'm like, no, but it's not working. Like, I don't have a solution. It's this person's upset and this availability doesn't work, and I don't have the skill set. And she just looked at me and she was like, it always works out. And she was right, because at the end of the day, we are going to get the work done. We are going to find a solution. And that was kind of what I thought about when you said that. There's going to be a solution. And I think that's something that has kept me going in experiences where I've had those super stressful moments and things aren't fitting together, and there doesn't seem to be a way to put the puzzle together. So I wonder, is that something that resonates with you as well? Do you have that experience?
Every day, pretty much at the moment.
Yeah.
I just think there is always a solution. It might not be the solution that people necessarily want to hear, and it may not be a solution next year because it didn't go so well, but you can only do what is kind of available, and you can only do your best. And kind of similar to what your manager said to you, we're not saving lives, and we can find other options, but it also depends on how others around you can help you. So how others in the business can kind of support you. Is there kind of flexibility elsewhere? And if those people aren't open and honest with you, also there's not too much you can do. So you can offer, but you kind of need something in return. And everything comes back around, swings and roundabouts. I'm sure they'll need something from you later down the line. And that's something that we leverage more often than not, because it does. And people will win new clients and they'll need to come back to you. So when like in RM, we need something, it comes back to that relationship piece. You go back to that person that asked you for something 3 weeks ago and see if they can help you out. And sometimes they can't, but a lot of the time they will. So it all comes back down to that relationship and that communication piece with everyone in the business.
Could not agree more. And that's the part, I think that's this, to call it the invisible part of resource management, that a lot of people who aren't in resource management don't necessarily understand. There is a huge relationship, communication, interpersonal skills aspect of this job that I suppose you could do without. However, I think it would, in my opinion, make the role a lot less strategic and a lot less value add for the organization and certainly for leadership. So it's interesting to hear you say that many of the most successful resource managers that I've known over the years have really leaned into that, and quite frankly I would say it's maybe the most important skill set that a resource manager can develop, because to your point, you're not dealing with a population of people that is constantly rotating. You're dealing with essentially the same leadership group and the same group of individuals that are being assigned to work as well. And quite frankly, they will remember how they were treated. They will remember what really, I would say, what it felt like to engage in that interaction. And the other thing that actually you're bringing up a lot of words of wisdom from my past here. I remember someone saying to me also when I was very junior, I had this really great sort of staffing win with someone that was more on the junior side. I think he was probably a senior level person at that time, a senior on the audit side. And I remember thinking, hey, that was really great. You know, it's really satisfying when you can actually make something work. And one of the other more seasoned RMs said, hey, you know, that person, they'll be the manager, they'll be the senior manager, right? And you'll deal with them in that capacity later. And in a way, you're teaching them about what this staffing thing is all about and kind of shaping their perspective on it too, which was, I think, really what makes it very, very rewarding and in some cases challenging, but mostly rewarding for people that are in the field. Georgia, you mentioned one of the other things that I heard you say was it's not just about continuity. I couldn't agree more. So continuity, in my experience, and I think many resource managers would agree, it's a factor for sure. And in some cases, it is a very important factor or the most important factor. But I'm curious to hear from your perspective, what are the other things, right? What else is it about? What are the other things that come up? So continuity, certainly it sounds like something that's asked for. What are the other things that people are either that are in high demand that people are asking for?
I think continuity comes from the fact that they found a really great achiever and they don't want to lose them. And with certain clients, as you say, that is key. They are very complex and you need someone with that prior knowledge. But often you can just have a couple of people that were on it the year before, and then you can bring new people up and develop them. The thing is, if you have the same people year in, year out, you're probably going to lose someone along the way anyway, because that's just how the world works. People do move on. And if people do the same thing year in, year out, for some people it works. For a lot of people that kind of want to move on in their career and they want new opportunities, they won't stick around if you're just giving them the same jobs and the same clients, because that's just not what people look for. So it's kind of about, I would say, investment in people as well. So we need to identify where there are skill gaps, and what can we do to get people up to the level of those high achievers. We can put them on the same jobs. We can have the high achievers train the people that we don't feel like are really performing as well. You might end up taking a slight knock on the budget initially, but in the long run, you'd rather keep your staff and build your staff internally rather than the amount of money that it costs to then hire someone else is probably a lot bigger than a small shortfall in your budget because you took someone else on in your job that you probably might not have wanted in the first instance.
Absolutely. No, I agree with that completely. And I'm going to make a connection here that hopefully our listeners are making in their heads as well. But we recently had an episode with a partner and RM pairing, Paul McIntosh and Melissa Rosenblum. And I want to highlight from the partner perspective, if you think back to that episode and what leaders get out of resource management, the value of resource management, it's a lot of the stuff that George is talking about right now, right? It's understanding that next level thinking around why things are happening and what you can do as the resource manager to help the partners in the moment, because they are, let's just say it, sometimes short-sighted in the moment because they're trying to get something done. Yeah. They need and can benefit from resource management's guidance around, hey, here's the bigger picture, here's what's happening, and really looking at the organization, the practice, the group, whatever it is as a whole, taking that bird's eye view of here's what's going to be right overall for the team, for the practice, for the person, for the individual, for the client, for the job. And a lot of times resource managers have the very unique perspective to actually give an informed opinion about that and have a vantage point that other people don't really have. And so I would absolutely encourage anyone who finds themselves in that role. You have access to a lot of information. You have a lot of insight based on what you're seeing in the day in and day out. So listen to what Georgia just said, because I think there's a lot of benefit there in taking that information and really putting it together in a way that is not only beneficial for, of course, the group that you're serving and the leaders that you're interacting with, but quite frankly, for yourself as you're trying to elevate and grow within your own career. So making that linkage there. And circling back then, Georgia, to something else that you said around escalation points. So this is another thing that has come up as very much a theme, I would say, in some of our past episodes. So I'm really interested to hear, tell us about that. What does that mean, escalation points? Is that a process? Is that kind of case by case as it comes up? You kind of make up, who it makes sense to escalate to. Tell us about that. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I think it probably varies within each firm. And for us at the moment, where we're fairly new in RM, it kind of just, it's when we've done all we can as RMs, we've exhausted all options, we've laid everything on the table, so to speak, and we've just got partners that aren't budging or managers that said there's no other way we can do this, has to be that time. It kind of then, something has to give at the end of the day, and we're going to have to do both jobs. So it's then kind of taken up to the next level. So usually a partner-to-partner conversation, they have the same interest in the firm. They both are putting into the firm to get out of the firm. So then it's their kind of conversation between them. And sometimes it does just have to go above the kind of resource advisor. We usually give all the information to the partners that are having that conversation. And it's probably nothing new that they're about to hear in those partner conversations. Most of the time it's come from the RM team and we've said it before, but sometimes just having that next step up and having people speak from partner to partner or director to director, they may just skew it in a way that they understand from their director perspective or their partner perspective. And as long as we've given the data behind it and the evidence and why we're kind of pushing back and why we're doing this, you usually do get there in the end, or there is some kind of compromise. I just think sometimes it helps to have a step up, even if you feel like it's not a win because you've already done all of that work. It is a win in hindsight. You just have to kind of take a bit of comfort in that, and it does happen, and it will happen everywhere eventually, but it's nothing that you haven't or have not done.
So very well said. I do want to pause here and really kind of dissect what you just explained, because this is an area that I have seen resource managers really experience a lot of challenges in, meaning it's sometimes hard to determine what the right moment is to escalate, because if you do it too soon, there could be this almost pitfall around constantly escalating, right? And constantly going to the partner group, in which case it's like starting to diminish a little bit the value that you're bringing as resource management. On the other extreme, there's not escalating at the right time or often enough, and now things start to get a little bit out of hand. Time has been wasted. Things are put into motion that should not have been put into motion, and now that's going too far. So it's interesting. I don't know that I have the perfect template for when to escalate. All these situations are so very unique and different, which is what makes it complex, to begin with. Yeah. But I think that it's more of an art than a science at this point. In really, I think going back to Georgia, what you said earlier around investing in your relationships, I think it really matters to understand who you're dealing with and who you're engaging with, because the better that you know them, the more equipped you will be to make an informed decision around what escalation should look like or could look like. It's definitely, I know as a resource management leader, this is one of the hardest things to teach is getting RMs to the point where they can quickly recognize that on their own. And so I think it's a really interesting concept. I'm a big analogies person. And so I relate it back to, I take a workout class that I really love. And the teacher, she's really great. And she will sometimes give us modifications that we can make, right? So she'll teach us, a certain move, and she'll say, if you're feeling good and you want to challenge yourself, you can do this, or you can do this. And what I love is that she then gives you this sort of catch where she says, hey, if you see that you do that and you go to challenge yourself, but you're feeling a lot of stress, let's say in your low back, you've gone too far, right? You're doing it wrong. And so I think in a lot of ways, that's what resource management is as well when it relates to these escalation points. It's, you should try to do it. And yes, you should challenge yourself as a resource manager, and you should be on the front lines and put your best foot forward and try to solve the problem. However, if you're feeling unnecessary strain, that's probably an indication that you've gone too far, right? You've gone into a territory that maybe it's not quite right. And so I think a lot of times it comes from experience and learning in that way, and dealing with people, which is why I think you see some more seasoned resource managers that they just know, they're like, oh yeah, this is not going to end well. We're going to have to do something different here. But it's interesting. I think, I'm curious, Georgia, what you think of that, if you agree with that stance.
It comes down, I think, to a little bit of instinct, and you can usually kind of guess what questions your escalation point is going to ask you. If you feel like you can answer them all and you've exhausted everything, then I think that's probably the time that you should be escalating it. If you're kind of running that scenario over in your head and you think, oh, well, if they ask me this, I haven't done that, then that's probably something you should explore before you then take it further. But it could then come down to time pressures. The client is new and it's starting in a month's time. You don't really have that luxury. So to get the best result and the quicker answers, people do sometimes respond a bit better to kind of that hierarchy, as much as we don't always want to admit it. In time pressures, it does definitely help. So as you say, I don't think there's a set kind of path yet. If you find out, please let me know. But I would say just trust kind of your gut, and that you trust everything that you've done and you've exhausted every avenue. And then when there's no more, then you give all of that information to someone else and they just say it in a different way. And then you get the answer that you want.
Such good advice. And what I would say is, look, it's hard. It's not, if it was easy, we wouldn't be in this situation, right? So it's going to be difficult. And I think resource managers that are listening to this are probably shaking, nodding their heads and saying, yes, I experienced that. And I know what that means. Here's the real takeaway, I think, from this is recognize the fact that there needs to be escalation points. Even if you won't, even if each situation is going to be different, you cannot plan out every if-then scenario and figure everything out. That's just not possible. But what you can do is you can prepare yourself for success by having an escalation point for when inevitably this situation does occur. You at least have a plan. You have someone that you can go to. You have a partner or a leader or someone that is going to be able to help smooth this over. And maybe if it's not a person, maybe it's a process. Maybe it is, hey, you know what? When something like this occurs, as Georgia described, we're going to get both partners on the phone and we're going to work this out, And so I think that's a thing that is an undervalued tool in the resource management toolkit. And a lot of times I have seen resource managers will take on the burden themselves, right? And they'll kind of run themselves to the ground of trying to get something done. And the thing is that actually you're doing yourself a disservice by doing that, because having escalated sooner, it really could have expedited a solution. And so I think that's a real takeaway. One other point that I would like to touch on, you mentioned an RM partner. Tell us about that. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I think how it works for us at the moment is we have, so MHA is split into different regions. We've got offices all over the UK at the moment, and we're trying to kind of get resource management representatives in each of those regions. So I form part of what we call the central resourcing team. So my role is actually resourcing, and then there's a couple of others. Whereas the people that we have in the different regions at the moment are already fee earners. So they're already kind of audit managers, audit directors. And then we all kind of come together and have the same goal. And we're trying to think, how can we better resource management in our firm, and all about like our protocols and stuff, because we're a decentralized function at the moment where the kind of resourcing is new. So lots of the technical kind of resourcing is done still by managers. So it kind of needs a forum where we can still discuss those resourcing matters, and it gets an insight from kind of the people on the ground of why what we want to do doesn't work, or what we don't want to do works for them, kind of thing, and vice versa. So then at the top of that, we have like the resource manager. So he's like head of resourcing, but he's a partner. So he just kind of has that overarching kind of say when it comes to yes, no, and they're the ones that have kind of conversations when we're trying to get things through the board and things like that. So we're also heavily involved. So my manager will have those conversations as well. And they're like another little sub team, but it's nice to have an audit partner on the ground that has the same goal as you. And he can then send that message across the business to the other partners with like this. He basically supports us and we support him.
I love that. I love that perspective. And I think there's a couple of takeaways here that are really key if you think back to this conversation. So the first is communication. The importance of communication and communication skills cannot be overstated. So that's a huge takeaway. The other is this idea of there is going to be a solution, or it always works out. It's kind of this mantra that RMs should be repeating to themselves, because it helps you power through some of the challenges that we deal with. Investing in your relationships at all levels, that's one of the things that I heard here, and I think it's so obvious why that is. The other piece that I'd really highlight is not only the escalation points, but also a different way of saying, Georgia, what you just described related to the RM partner in that role is having the leadership buy-in and having the support. So said differently, if you're an RM that's listening to this and you don't feel that you have escalation points or an escalation process in place, that's probably an area to focus on. If you don't feel like you have the buy-in or a leadership, let's say sponsor or someone that can either formally or informally champion resource management, that's something to focus on and really think about, where can something like that be created within your organization, and that will be helpful. So a couple of things to take away. Switching gears a little bit, Georgia, you are an RMCP. Congratulations. For anyone who doesn't know what that is, Resource Management Certified Professional. So this is a certification through the Resource Management Institute, which is the professional body, the professional association for resource managers officially. So Georgia, tell us about that process. When did you become certified? What was it like? We want to hear everything.
I became certified last year, so May 2023. I had been in resource management just under a year. So I think it was a good time to kind of take that next step and kind of do the qualification for someone that hadn't had any resource management experience before. It was just another forum where you could kind of validate a lot of the feelings you had felt in your experiences and then kind of put them into kind of a process. So it was a 3-month course, I believe. I did mine entirely online because obviously I'm based in the UK and I think the course is run in America somewhere. I didn't quite get to go to America, but maybe one day. So you send all the materials and that kind of thing, and you work through the content yourself, and then there's some case studies of like potential scenarios and how you can work your way through those, kind of like similar to what we've spoke about. You've got two jobs happening at the same time, who you're going to put on them, this is your staff pool and who best suits them skill wise. So I think it was really great because it focuses a lot on best practice. So I think resource management works best when it's centralized, and that is a real thing that they kind of repeat in the course, because obviously you get the best efficiencies out of resource management when you are centralized, and it covers things like skills, how your skills matrix is really fundamental to make sure the right people are on the right jobs, staffing, forecasting, sourcing of extra resources, the technology you use even, and like your governance structure within resource management. So I think the forecasting side was something that I hadn't really had loads of exposure to before, especially as we was implementing a new software at the time. The resource management was still fairly new and we were still trying to get a lot of buy-in from the business. The forecasting module was really quite eye-opening to kind of see how efficient it really can be, from being a firm that was quite reactive, and then using all of that information and that knowledge of how it can work in the future and what you can do to kind of get on the front foot rather than always being 10 steps behind was really kind of beneficial. It was really, really helpful, especially for someone that hadn't been in RM before. So I would definitely kind of recommend it for anyone that is looking to even like get into resource management, really.
Super, super helpful perspective and insight. I think a lot of times it's one thing to read about something on a website and entirely different to hear from someone that's been through the process and actually understands what it is and kind of can give you that inside scoop on what it's really like and what types of things you do. So you heard it here, RMCP. You can find that through the Resource Management Institute for folks that are either not yet certified or thinking about it. Georgia, I'll volunteer you as someone who they can reach out to potentially to pick your brain about what that experience was like. So amazing. And this has been, I think, a really, really informative episode. I've really enjoyed talking with you. Thank you so very much for sharing your story with us. And with that, we will wrap up our conversation. Thank you all for tuning in, and be sure to subscribe to hear more episodes.